All right, well, welcome to another episode of Kingdom Over Coffee. I am speaking with Allen Arnold, who is out in Colorado Springs. Is that right, Allen?
That's right. That's correct.
And Allen and I met, back in July at a writing conference where he was speaking. And we just had a great conversation while the two old guys sat on the side and everybody else was playing a Nerf war. And it was just a really great conversation. And as the more we talked, I was like, man, I really like to get you on the podcast. And so he has just agreed, and I've been really excited about this one because I think it's going to be really inspirational for a lot of people. The topic of what we're about to talk about with creativity and the kingdom, and just how inspirational the kingdom is meant to be. Despite what we try to make it look like sometimes. So welcome, Allen. How are you doing?
Thanks, Brett. I'm doing great. I'm looking out over Pikes Peak area, and it just is an epic morning. There's snow on the peak, and it's just, I'm doing well. It's a Friday when we're talking right now, and so I'm looking forward to the weekend. We've got a lot of fun plans as a family.
That's awesome. Yeah, we were, so I didn't tell you this, but we were in Colorado over the summer, right before Realm Makers. So my family was actually in Colorado, out in the Dillon area, out in the, where all the snow stuff is. Yeah. And there's some amazing views out there, man. I mean, it's just so phenomenal. So is that what you're looking at now?
Years. It is, and we've been here 7 years, and it never gets old. I mean, it always takes my breath away, seeing the mountains, and especially with snow on them.
Yeah. My sister and my brother-in-law live out there now. They used to vacation for a few months, and those few months kept growing into more months until they finally just bought a house and stayed out there. So we went out there to visit them, and like I said, it was just amazing. And we'll get to a little bit of introduction, but let's just take this opportunity to connect with our topic later. Does looking at views like that, does that help you kind of connect with God, like being inspired by nature, by His creation? Is that something that you ever experience as you're, having your quote unquote quiet times or whatever?
Oh, absolutely. At our home, we have a deck that overlooks Pikes Peak. And that was really, when we were looking for a home, when we moved to Colorado, when I walked out and saw that, I didn't even need to see the rest of the house. Like, I was like, I can make however many bathrooms there are, however many bedrooms, we can make that work. But this view, this is what I want to wake up to every day. And nature does inspire me. A good friend of mine was saying most people he had read a survey that said most people spend about 90-something% of their life indoors in artificial environments. And so whether that's at their desk or whether that's in an office building somewhere, most of the time, most of us are indoors. And nature, I think, is what really brings us to life. It's really what God created. And so often we lose touch with the beauty of that and actually the experience of it. So yes, like that, to me, nature is the first way. The creation is how God expressed Himself to us. And so whether that's a mountain view or an ocean or a walk in the woods or on a trail, a hike, whatever it may be, just doing something outdoors every day, I think, is key to connect us back to not only nature, but to God's creativity.
Yeah, I would agree. Being Irish, my last name is Mooney, and I've done, studies on Patrick and some of the Irish, Celtic waves of evangelism and that kind of thing. And it's really interesting how much they were inspired by nature. Like, I think in our modern world, it seems almost, like a tree hugger kind of idea, right? I mean, like, it seems almost like this, granola kind of way, but those saints, those Celtic saints, and some of the other in church history really did look to the creation itself to as inspiration of who God was. And I think I agree. I think it's important. So why don't you give everybody just a little introduction about who you are? I mean, obviously I know who you are, but just let everybody know who you are, what you do. I know you're in Colorado.
Right. Yep. So a little bit on my background is I've always loved creativity. I've always been drawn to story, even from boyhood. In some ways, story kind of rescued or awakened me into the more true identity of who I am and who God meant me to be, even before I knew God very well. Story was something He used to draw me to Him. So I've always been fascinated by that. I spent my early years out of college in an advertising agency, and man, creativity and ideas were swirling there. It was a hotbed of the imagination. However, it wasn't tethered to anything that really mattered. And so it was a lot of great, campaigns for some of the biggest commercial brands. And yet, it didn't really, other than just the thrill of a big idea, didn't really go anywhere. And so I shifted after a few years of that into Christian publishing and started working at Thomas Nelson and oversaw their marketing for most of the divisions there. And then from there was offered the chance to do something that tied to story, and that was to become the fiction publisher, so to start the fiction division at Thomas Nelson. And that spoke to my heart in such a big way, because now I could take creativity for ideas, for writing, for promotion, but now take those ideas and take them to another level, which is how to help people tell their stories. And so did that for a decade or so, over 500 novels with authors, and some brand new names at the time, and some New York Times best-selling folks, and it was amazing. And did that, was in a Camelot period, I would say, of life, because it was the imagination and story, creativity, wildness of new ideas. And then got a call and was asked to join Ransomed Heart, which is a ministry of the heart, and it's in Colorado. And the whole goal of Ransomed Heart is awakening people to greater intimacy and freedom with God. And so I've been here for 7 years now, still work here and love it, and travel with the ministry team. I was telling you a little bit earlier before we started the podcast, we have 2 international events this fall. So it's just an amazing ministry that transcends. It's not tied to a denomination. It's not tied to any kind of church. It's simply doing what Jesus invited us to do when He defined His ministry in Isaiah 61, which is to set captives free and heal the broken heart. And so that's what we do. We try to heal the brokenhearted and set captives free. So freedom and the heart are big cornerstones of this ministry. And in the meantime, I write. And so I'm working right now on a second allegory. And the allegories that I do are really something that I feel like is a way to help people understand how to pursue greater intimacy in the midst of chaos, in the midst of craziness. How do we pursue our intimacy and creativity with God?
That's so good. And that was more of what your first book was about as well?
So the first book, it's called The Story of With, a story. And the reason I call it The Story of With is because it's an allegory of what does it look like to live actively and intimately with God, but it's told in a fantastical story along the lines of one of my best friends is Ted Decker, and I used to be his publisher as well. And so I really wanted to tell a story that would have that type of feel to it. So it's very mystical. It's full of mystery. It's full of the unknown. But the whole goal of the allegory is to draw people into what does it like if we wholeheartedly run after God, and how does that affect our creativity, our imagination, our identity, and our intimacy with Him. So that was the first book, and it's been out for about 2 years. and continues to spread in really wild ways as people discover it and dive into it. And now I'm working on what is really the next step, I think, which is how do we approach chaos? What do we do with the chaos in our lives, specifically in terms of our creativity? And how can we use our gifting and our presence to really shift the atmosphere so that instead of we wait chaos out, or we run from chaos, or we fear chaos, how do we actually step into it, and how do we transform chaos into beauty, life, and order? And so that's what I'm writing right now, and that'll be out next year. But it's amazing, Brett, to me, when we start seeing our gifting, our talent, our art as a way to draw nearer to God and invite others then into that, it shifts from simply craft and technique and business and productivity into a much wilder, more beautiful, I think, communion with God, because then it becomes more of a dance with Him in the very gifting that He's given us. We discover more of Him as we pursue what we love with our art. And that has an eternal spark in it that is far greater than simply knowing the beats of a good story, if you're a writer, or knowing the things that need to be in every novel that's this certain genre. Those are formulaic things. Those are things that are taught a lot at writers' conferences on how to do what you do better. And there's a place for those things for sure. Like, writers need to grow in their craft, and they need to know how to tell a good story. But if they're not co-creating with God, I would say they've missed the whole foundation of why God gave them that desire and that gift.
Yeah, I think bringing order to chaos, I think that's a lot of what we talked about a few months ago. Just the idea that this world can be so confusing. We just had an election. We won't give our political opinions, but, just how confusing and how divisive it can be. And it seems very chaotic, and it seems very, disturbing at times. And yet, as we were talking about, just bringing into the conversation the creative order of God. Because I think a lot of times when people think about bringing order to chaos, they think, like you're talking about, they think of structure, they think of, they think of limits or whatever, what have you. But I really liked what we were talking about, how you were talking about the creative order of God, that it doesn't necessarily have to. In fact, it might be actually the opposite. It might be limitless. And so, just talk about that, about bringing a creative order into situations that seem chaotic and hopeless or whatever to people.
Right. Well, I think you named it when you said, you were describing most people's days, and chaos is a part of our lives, whether we like it or not. And it's not something that we choose. It's not something, for the most part, it's not something that we try to usher in. Some people live chaotic lives by bad choices. But even if you are trying to walk well with God, and even if you are trying to be proactive in certain things, chaos still comes. The phone call still comes of the illness, or there's the betrayal, or there's the tight financial situation, or there's just a house with teenagers, which I'm living now. Like 3 teenagers.
Yeah, me too.
Really good kids, but yes, chaos ensues every day, and so it's going to happen. And the question is, what do we do? And so I started just my own personal, out of curiosity and a hunger to know more, I started studying that and diving into that from a scripture standpoint about a year and a half ago. And my question was, how does God handle chaos? Because in my first book, in the story of With, I really dove into, how do I know God as creator? And that fascinated me, Father and Creator, those two ways of knowing God and really then knowing myself through that lens. If God is my creator, if God is my father, then what does it look like for me to be his son, or a woman to be his daughter, or what does it look like for us to be co-creators with him? Well, my next question is, and what I've been working on in this new allegory is, okay, if God is creator and father, then how does he approach chaos? Because there was chaos throughout creation. Mm-hmm. And so basically going into the early verses of Genesis, and even before the days of creation, and in Genesis 1:2, there's God's Spirit hovering over this murky darkness, this unknown. What a lot of Hebrew scholars would say, it was a time where he was bringing order and beauty and life out of chaos, out of this murky darkness. And so that really piques my curiosity. Like, okay, what does that mean? What does that mean in terms of what was happening there? But also, what does it mean now for my life? Because if my father, if my creator, when he sees chaos, he doesn't get sweat on his brow. He doesn't get a twitch in his eye. He doesn't, buckle and fall to his knees. He goes into it and he transforms the chaos. And so as his son and as his sons and daughters, how do we approach the chaos that we can't stop from coming in our life? It's going to happen. Anybody, whenever I'm speaking, if I ask people who has chaos in their life, and usually about 95% of people will raise their hand, and the other 5%, either it's about to hit at the next break, or they're not telling the truth. Right. Because chaos we all have to deal with. And so how do we approach it? And so what I've come to see is it's two ways, through in the same way that God did. First, through our presence. Through our presence, we can walk into a chaotic situation and we can actually change the atmosphere. And you see this happen in work situations and family situations. Over the holidays, when there's kind of family reunions around the table, you can see the strength of somebody who has a presence that is the presence of God in them. And they can go into a room and all of a sudden what was chaotic in terms of a conversation or a situation, by their presence, they can bring order and they can bring life. And that's one way, and that's certainly how God did. But secondly, we do it through our gifting, through our creativity. And through our creativity, what we create with God has that eternal spark, I believe, and that can bring to people life and beauty and order. Whether we're an artist painting, whether we're a chef creating a meal, whether we're an architect, a storyteller, a writer, our words, and when I say beauty, life, and order, I don't just mean, peaceful, quaint stories. I mean, we can be telling epic, surreal, fantasy. We can be writing things that are dangerous and that are, really go into hard things about light and darkness. But through that, because of who we are, just as who God is, the Bible is full of epic, rough, raw stories. And yet the effect of them isn't to make us more rough or raw. It's to bring us into more life and beauty and order. And so the stories, I'm not talking about G-rated stories, only, although there's a place for those. But I'm saying, what are we creating? And what is the effect on others? And if we know how to approach chaos as we create, I think our canvas actually becomes much more authentic, has much more integrity, and I think it has a much bigger impact on the ultimate reader or a person who experiences it.
Yeah, just a couple thoughts while you were talking, and I think we talked about this even in St. Louis at the conference. Just that's so good what you were saying about God came into his spirit hovered over the waters of the deep, and he came into chaos and he created, let there be light, and, let there be this. And he starts speaking creative order into that chaos. But what I was thinking about while you were talking is he made man in his own image and then gave him the exact same job. He gave him the exact same mission. Adam was supposed to be fruitful and multiply and take the garden out to the rest of the world. He was supposed to replicate that sort of idea. He was supposed to take it out there. And so I just love the idea that in the new covenant, that's part of who we are. That's part of who we are when we come into a situation and we can bring redemption to a situation. We can see the chaos like you're saying that we all deal with. We can see it as an opportunity to bring light instead of like being discouraged, like I want to do, right? I want to be discouraged and I want to get mad and but Jesus saw those situations as an opportunity to bring something creative into the situation. And I just think that's a beautiful way to look at life, because so many people are bound by ideas and they don't realize they are. But creativity thinks of different ways, thinks outside the box, thinks of something different that can inspire people that there might be a different way than what they're living.
Oh, I think that's a great way to say it. And yeah, like we were given the garden and then we promptly lost the garden, in Scripture. Adam and Eve quickly gave it away through some horrific choices. And the story now is us with God, with Jesus, with the Holy Spirit, getting back into Eden, in different ways, mythically and literally. And I think our creativity and our gifting, Brett, is part of that. It's how the garden was created. It's how Eden was created. And now we get to, in our creativity, usher it back in, bring it back with God as creator, as our Father. And so, you're right, a big first step of that is we have to quit being shocked and offended and thrown off guard by chaos. Like it is going to happen. You don't have a choice. I don't have a choice. And so either we can go into it with a strength and a courage and a clarity, or we can continually keep getting thrown off every time and continually being ticked off that, the car broke down again. Right. Finances are tight. Right. Our kid, there's an issue with our child and, right. We live in this world, Jesus said, there will be, and we, always say trouble, but you could insert the word chaos. In this world, there is chaos. Now, what are we going to do with the chaos? That's the question. And I've had so many friends who are artists say, in some relation, they'll tell me, oh, I've got this great idea. I've got this incredible story. I just need to wait about, a year because things in my life are somewhat chaotic right now. And my advice to them is, no, don't wait. Use the chaos as fuel for something to be transformed and co-create with God in the midst of it. I use a lot of examples with writers just because I used to be a publisher, and I've been at a lot of conferences, hundreds of writers' conferences over the years. And one of the phrases that makes me want to just kind of jump out of my skin now is when people talk about writing is like finding a cozy chair, a cozy chair and a quiet coffee shop with their favorite pen. And, it's this snugly cozy thing. And I want to go, I don't know. I think most creativity, the best creativity comes when we're hard pressed. It doesn't come in our cozy socks, and I think that's because creativity, yes, we need a place where we can focus and we need a place where we can, kind of minimize distractions. But I think in the midst of the craziness of life, that's where God can use us most And if we're waiting until we're at some cabin in the woods to get our story written, we're not going to get many stories written, you know? and so it's just a different way, I guess, to see things. But another friend of mine was talking about writing, and he was talking about just, his experience personally as well. And it was really interesting. One of the things he said when we were talking was, Allen, I really believe, he said, Allen, I really believe people do their best work in the midst of what seems like the worst times. And I said, well, like, why is that? Why do you think that is? And it's because in those times of crisis, it pulls something out in us that it helps us see who we are in a way that we normally wouldn't. And if we can capture that, and if we can invite people into that journey, something magical happens. The way he said it was, an artist's best work comes not from comfort, but from the limitations and chaos of life. And I found that to be true. Anytime, you look at some writers of like screenplays and of some of the best TV shows and movies, and in the early years where money was tight, where they were sleeping on a friend's couch, some of their best ideas came. And when they have the $5 million mansion and life is pretty cush, and they've got assistants and they've got servants or people, doing everything for them, serving them, not so much, that's not really when the greatest things happen. And so it's just worth noting when it comes to chaos that if we reinterpret it, I think it would go a long way in serving us as artists to find our best creativity.
Well, yeah, man, my mind's going a mile a minute. So just a couple of things as I'm thinking, our reaction to the chaos, it makes us upset. It discourages us. Whatever our reaction to it, and valid reactions, right? Like you're saying, it could be a death. It could be, something validly awful, right? Hard times, crises. But our response to that, I think it's important to note that our response to that is really a desire for life the way it should be, right?
Yes.
Like, and so just a few episodes ago, I interviewed a guy. His name is Eric Swanson, and he lives out there. I don't think Colorado Springs, but he lives out there in Colorado as well. And I asked him his definition of the kingdom, and he said his favorite definition of the kingdom of God is life as God intended it to be. And so, we react to these things like grief and things not working not the way that they should, and it causes stress and all of that. We react to that because at the heart of it, we long for life the way God created it to be. We long for that. We long for that sort of the Eden, as mythical Eden, as you put it. And then I was also thinking about how Jesus said, if you want to enter the kingdom, you have to be like a little kid. Like if you want to get in, you got to be like a little kid. And what do kids do? What does a counselor do with a kid who's had trauma or they're upset or there's something wrong? A counselor will sit there and they won't talk to them first. What will they do? They will have them play, and they'll just watch. They'll just watch them play, because that's how kids process things. And I think what you're saying, what I'm connecting with, is that when we have pain, when we have issues, when we have strife, when we have stress, the creativity that comes out of that is us like a kid processing it and redeeming it in a way that makes sense of it. And that's what inspires people. That connects with people. That's why you're saying the early works are the ones that we connect with the most, because that's what they were doing. They were processing what they were experiencing in a way that makes it universal and redeems it,
Yeah, that's really good, Brett. I think that resonates. And that's a great definition of the kingdom as well. that he gave. Um, I I think it all starts with how do we define, even going back a step before our creativity, how do we define and interpret how the world is supposed to work? And if we think when we follow God that means life is supposed to be relatively easy or things are supposed to all come together, then it's easy to get really irritated and angry with God and other people, by the way, around us, those closest to us, our kids, our spouse, our coworkers, because it feels like we're being cheated somehow or God's holding out somehow. And when we interpret life that way, we set ourselves up for even more chaos.
Good.
On the other hand, the other trap, I think, though, is to say, well, yeah, life is just going to be really hard, and it's going to all be pain and loss. But when we get to heaven, it gets really good. And so we just kind of hunker down. And that's not good either, right? Because
that's great.
God called us here, and Jesus said, I've come to give you life to the full. And so life to the full starts now, today, not what a depressing gospel of it starts when we die. We have to go through this life with none of it. And the only thing that happened good in this life was we said yes to God, but then we're on hold until we're in eternal glory with him. And so to be able to go, no, life starts now. And so the correct interpretation, I believe, is, right, we are to be fully awakened. We are to have our heart set free. We are to live in freedom, create in freedom in the midst of the chaos.
Amen.
And yes, chaos is coming. Is the chaos from God? I don't believe most of it is. Most of it, we have an enemy. We don't often live like it, but we have an enemy here who's out to kill, steal, and destroy. We also create our own chaos a lot of times by really poor choices that we make in moments of weakness and when we're trying to live for self or for ego. And so we create some of our own chaos. But when we can walk well and intimately with God, and then chaos comes, boy, that's actually God saying, just like Jesus said with the disciples, like, now you go and you heal this person. Now you go and do this. He hands the baton. I think with chaos, God hands us the baton and says, now you step into chaos. Don't ask me to rescue you. Don't ask me to fix it for you. You step into chaos as a creator, as a son or daughter who co-creates and who walks with me. You can actually make chaos blink. Chaos should be more scared of you than you of chaos. So now go into it, and that changes our posture, and that opens us up to discovering more of our own identity. Like, how does somebody know they're a warrior? How does somebody know they have what it takes? Well, you can either just have somebody tell you that, or you can let them see that through experience. And I think God uses chaos sometimes to go, right, I told you could do it, but now do it. like you now know you can do it with me.
Yeah.
And so as an artist, our sword is our creativity. And God gives us that unique sword. And yours, Brett, looks different than mine. And whoever's listening, if we saw all of their swords out on a table, we would look at some and go, that doesn't even look like a sword. Like, or this one is, some weird color, or this one is some bizarre shape, and we don't even know how it's used, because that's not our gifting. That's not what we've been called to wield or to hold. But together we have all these weapons, and they're weapons that each one has been custom fitted for us. Now the question is, are we going to use it? And in using it for an artist, it looks a lot different as a painter, than it does for a school teacher, or than it does for a stay-at-home mom. But the best definition that I found for creativity, which I haven't read anywhere, somebody else I think people all discover truth from God in different ways, but for me, the way I would put words to it is creativity is bringing something new into existence and using it to change the atmosphere for good.
Amen.
And I'm talking about God-given creativity.
Yeah.
So we can change the atmosphere when we bring something new into existence, and we can change chaos. We can transform chaos. We can actually make things different than they were before us or our art when we approach it that way rather than run from it. And so that's what's making me come alive in talks around the country. And I'm meeting with I meet with creatives, not just writers, but all sorts of creatives. And that's my goal, is to help them see what it means to co-create with God in new ways. And a big part of that is, how do you approach or respond to chaos?
Yeah. It's funny, you kind of talking about this, and the quote that I shared from 4 years ago on Facebook this morning, and it just kind of came up as, hey, see what you said, 4 years ago. And it says, when it gets dark, you don't leave the room, you turn on the light. In other words, that's our response. And what a great way to look at even like the Great Commission, like go out into chaos and bring creativity, bring the creative gift that you are and that you have, and bring that with you that you've been given. Because, so often we just kind of circle the wagons, and kind of the church world, and we don't know what else to do sometimes, right? We just circle the wagons, and it feels safe and cozy, like you were saying about the writers, with the favorite pen and the favorite this and the favorite songs but even the Great Commission is not even an invitation, right? It's a command, right? Go out into chaos and be the light, be the redemption that He has for the world. I think it's an amazing idea, and it's so much. When you add the creativity aspect to it, what I love about it is it's less about obligation and it's more about identity. It's more about being inspired, and inspiring others. It's less about just hand people a track. It's about going into situations and bringing redemption with you. I think it's amazing.
Well, right, and that's we were talking about earlier, like how we define things, and I think that when we define ourselves as our goal is to save others, our goal is to teach a lesson, I think that diminishes our creativity, because I don't think most of the world looks to you or me or anybody listening to be their teacher. I don't think most people want us to teach them a lesson. I think what they want us to do, what they're open to us doing, is inviting us on a journey. So you invite me on a journey that you're on, and it's a journey that is intriguing, and it's one that I think might show me some things or a way to see life in a new way. Okay, I'll consider that. I'll look at that. But when it comes to our art, it makes a big difference, because if we're saying whatever our canvas is, we're using that canvas to invite people on a journey, the art will be different than if we use that canvas to say, no, sit down, I want to teach you a lesson. There's a big difference between saying, sit down and listen to me and pick up your backpack and travel with me.
So great, man. I think it's great. I think it's inspiring. I think you're totally right. If we've been made in the image of God, and we believe that we've been given the Spirit of God and been made free, then creativity, thinking outside the box, thinking of new solutions, coming up with new stories, whatever they might be, it has to be part of it. Jesus came up with new stories all the time, right? The kingdom of God is like this, or it's like that.
Yeah, and the end of John talks about how, if all the stories we could tell of Jesus were told, like, there wouldn't be enough books in the world to hold them. Like, there are endless stories we can tell that we could have heard from Jesus, that we will hear, I think, when we're sitting around the campfires in the kingdom in heaven one day. But that kind of creativity is boundless. That kind of creativity is endless. And that's why I think honestly, sometimes when the Christian fiction industry, just to use that, seems to stumble and sales seem to be low. Like, I mean, the biggest book that anybody outside of the internal industry, if you would just ask anybody kind of remotely on the fringes, what was the last big novel that they would call Christian fiction, or that they would think of as a novel that had a Christian theme, I think most people would say The Shack.
Mm.
Like, I'm talking about the general, not the person who's at all the writers' conferences.
Right.
But that book came out, 15 years ago or so?
Right. Yeah.
You know, and I'm not saying whether people, like The Shack or don't like The Shack is not my point. My point is simply, where are all the great storytellers who are changing the world? And I think part of the reason some of them are being held back is because they're listening to the industry saying, here's what we want, here's what's hot, here's the trend, here's the formula. And they need to quit listening to those voices and say, God, what did you invite me in your wildness and in your boundless creativity to create, even if the market is saying there's no place for it? Because am I going to listen to you, or am I going to listen to, an editor at Publishing House X who is the gatekeeper, but who really is looking in a reactive way? Because all of those times when people sit around at conferences and say, here's the panel, and here's what we know is hot, here's what we need for you to write, it's a retroactive way of seeing life, or the industry, or the creativity, because it's saying, here's what's worked, now do more of that. Well, guess what? By the time that writer does that, number one, it wasn't what they were ever called to do by God. Number two, by the time they get that book out, the next trend will have happened that nobody saw coming. And
Right.
so that book won't even, it's a terrible way to approach our gifting. But it's a formalized way, because industry people give industry answers, because that's what they live in. And I get it. And I'm not knocking them. I'm just saying the process is toxic and it's flawed, because what we really should be telling people is, don't ask us, if we're on a panel, you and I, Brett, if nobody's asked the two of us yet to be on our own panel, but if we were on a panel together, in the future, and somebody said, and there's a room of 500 authors, writers, wannabe writers, and they said, what should we write? I want us to be able, or whoever, to be able to say, write the thing that God has given you uniquely. That is your, to use the phrase earlier in our conversation, that's your weapon. That's the creative gift you've been given. So if you've been inspired to write space operas, with rabbits, and that's what makes you come alive, write that book. Write it.
Yeah.
And who cares if somebody says there's a market or not? Do what God says. Don't do what a gatekeeper says, or don't do what you think is the wisest. In Jeremiah 33, it talks about how, God is saying, if you follow me, if you will walk with me, if you stay with me, I will show you great and wondrous things beyond what you could imagine. So why don't we start doing that? Why don't we follow God and say, show me the things I could not imagine without you? Because as a creator, that's what I want to bring to life. That's what I want to breathe life into, not the 6 steps that every romance novel needs, or the 7 things that every fantasy book needs. Like, men try to define things, and God opens things up into mystery and faith and unknown. And so that's what I think, and that's what I feel is missing. That's what I feel is needed is, okay, God, you show me, and I'll run with you, and I'll be intimate in the process with you, and I'll go head on into the chaos if that's what it takes. But I'll do it with you, and in that, we'll bring life and beauty and order into whatever the art is that I'm working on. And man, if people start doing that, I really think we'd see a renaissance. And I think then when we ask people, hey, what's the latest thing that's a novel that you would call Christian that really has rocked your world? there'd be a new answer every year. There'd be a new answer every 6 months, because it's happening so frequently and the world doesn't know what to do with it, rather than, us going, well, gosh, we're just going to do what we think might work, and then we'll settle for crumbs in terms of sales, and it'll be something that most people don't remember in the next 6 months, and we'll move to our next project. I don't think that's the way the kingdom desires us as artisans to work.
No.
So you can tell probably it's a passion of mine, but I think it all starts from the seed in Genesis.
Yeah. I think that's great. And I think you're totally right that, formulas, and they have structures, have their place and different things. But, I think the kind of stories that really resonate with people are doing what you're talking about. I think a lot of Christian novels, the reason why they don't resonate is they do what a lot of churches do. They ask you to come into their world. And what you're talking about is write stories that go into the chaos and do something about it. And I think those are the kind of stories, those are the kind of people that the kingdom is about. And I totally agree. I think if we had more stories like that, they may not make certain people happy, I guess is what I'm trying to say. But I think they'll resonate with people like the Shack did, whether people agreed with it or not, it resonated with people on a very deep level. And that's why they remember it,
And if you think back to that time period, it was not a book, like it got rejected by a ton of publishers at the time, including somebody on my team. When I was a publisher, I didn't see it initially, but I found out later it had been one of the books that just never even made it to a pub board in our team, and like at most publishing houses. And I think it had over 100 rejections, and the big reason why was because it didn't fit any formula. Like, nobody could look at a book that had worked, that had been like that before, and so it felt risky. It didn't fit a mold. It wasn't the next thing like the last thing. And so, whether people like the Shack or not is irrelevant for this part of the conversation. But what we're saying is, usually the thing that creates in you the most fear, because, well, I don't know if it'll work. Nobody's done it before. Like, nobody's asking for this kind of book. In fact, they're telling me to do other things. Usually that, to me, that means you're on to something. You're onto something because you're not following formula and you're not trying to do the paint by numbers. You're actually being invited into the wild, tangled, unknown part of the forest that you get to blaze a trail in. You're not walking down a path others have made.
Yeah. And that inspires people. That's what inspires people, instead of, I did this, I checked these boxes. Maybe you made money, maybe you didn't, but those kind of stories are what inspire people. That's what they'll be talking about, So where can we find you? I know you're a part of the, that ministry there. Is that the best way to kind of get a hold of you on that website?
Well, the best way to find me for people who want to know more about this would be they can go to my website. It's under development right now, so it's in a little bit of transition. But if they go to With Allen, so WITHALLEN.com, they can find some of the podcasts I've done on creativity. They can find some blogs, hear a little bit more about some of the things I'm doing and where I'm speaking. Another way is through Twitter. I'm pretty active on Twitter because I love trying to say something in a few words that has some kind of eternal spark. And so I would rather say, 2 sentences than 2 paragraphs if I can. And so my Twitter handle is @TheStoryOfWith, which is the book title, The Story of With. But the really best way, if people are intrigued by this, Brett, I think that my number one invitation to them would be check out The Story of With on Amazon. What it is it's an allegory, but it has a couple of pages at the end of each chapter where it's a conversation with the reader. And so it's a chance through an allegory which carries the story to also pause at the end of each chapter and talk about things like the scars of our story, open and closed doors. How do we know when, so oftentimes Christians think if they apply for three things and one company or one college or one person, one publisher says yes, that must be God's will. Because two said no, one said yes, and I guess that's God saying go with them. Well, the problem is the enemy knows how to open doors just like God can, the enemy can, and God sometimes wants to teach us how to open a closed door. And that, like any good parent would want to show their son or daughter how to, okay, well, you're locked out of the car. Let me show you how to open the lock. You're locked out of the house. Let me show you how to open the lock. Well, the only way we know those answers is intimately walking with God, not a formula. And so that's the kind of thing the book does. So if people are intrigued by this, I would say start with the story of With. Let that hopefully be a balm to your soul if you're an artist or if you love creativity. And if you're looking for greater intimacy in what you love to do, that book is really, a friend described it as a roadmap for dreaming with God. And that's really, I couldn't say it better. Like, that's why I wrote it, is you want to dream bigger dreams with God, step into your story. And it's a story of With.
So good, man. Well, this has been a great conversation. Completely lived up to my expectations. So I really appreciate it. And if you will, just kind of pray for everybody as we close. I know you've got to get to a meeting and I've got to get to a meeting, but man, this has been really good. I appreciate it so much. Thank you so much.
Absolutely, Brett. Yeah, I'll pray. Father, I right now just reach out across wherever somebody's hearing this, whoever's hearing it. I reach out across that spectrum, God, and know that you have set the time for that to happen, that you have created the space for this conversation to reach the people that you want to hear it, your sons and daughters. And I pray for them greater intimacy with you in the art, in the things, in the creativity, in their gifting and talent that they're drawn to. I pray that they would have a hunger to do that, to pursue it with you, not for you primarily, as good as that is, but even more than that, with you, which is much more relational and much more intimate. And I pray you would help their dreams come alive. I pray that you would help their art flourish as they step into it with you as a son or daughter, co-creating with you. And God, I pray that spark would happen right now, that desire, that hunger, and that as they step deeper into that with you, that they learn who you are more, that they grow in intimacy with you, because then it's like a father and a daughter, father and a son on a playground. And I pray that that would happen for everyone listening now, and that you would continue to grow their hunger and draw them to you in the very things they love. In the midst of the chaos, in the midst of the craziness, God, help us find you and help us step into the chaos and actually transform it with you, together with you. It's in Jesus' name that we pray. Amen.
Amen. Thank you.